Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Prince George's County Memorial Library System's virtual programs. We are broadcasting you live from Maryland, here in Prince George's County and elsewhere in the state of Maryland. My name is Nick Brown. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Communication and Outreach, and I'm so grateful to all of you for joining us. We are back from our holiday season hiatus with live programs, and this is our first author special event back for the winter season here. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm just going to give you a couple of quick announcements and then turn it over to my wonderful colleagues who are going to be moderating tonight's program. We are broadcasting live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. So please share the link with your networks and friends. It's going to be a really special event, and we're very, very lucky to have both an author and illustrator with us tonight. So it is a bit unique from our typical author events. Also, just want to draw your attention to the comment feeds. We invite you to share your thoughts or ask questions at any time throughout the program on whatever platform you're viewing, and our moderators will be able to interact with you from here in the broadcast booth. And make sure you tag us at PGCMLS. And if you would like to borrow Plain Bad Heroines, which is the subject of tonight's discussion, we encourage you to check it out from Prince George's County's library at pgcmls.overdrive.com, or you can also visit our regular catalog at pgcmls.info. And M's other book, The Miseducation of Cameron Post, is also available on there for you. It's available. The new book, Plain Bad Heroines, is available in ebook and audiobook. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce two very special colleagues, and they're going to take it away, and I know you're going to have a great time. First up is Aya Martin, who is with the Laurel Branch Library, which is one of our spectacular library facilities and a really great staff team there. Aya is a circulation supervisor, and also other colleague, O. Horvath, who is with the digital services team and is a digital services specialist. And I know Aya and O are both super jazzed to talk about the book tonight, and you're going to have a great time. Thank you all so much for joining us, and please keep in touch with us over the week. We've got a lot of great events coming up tomorrow, very special tribute to Martin Luther King, and discussion of ending voter suppression against Black Americans that we hope you come back and join us for at 7 p.m. Very important. The world is in a very strange state, and we need to keep focus on these issues together. Okey-doke. Have fun, everyone. Thank you.
Okay, so I just want to introduce Emily Danforth to our event. So Emily is the author of a highly acclaimed young adult novel, which I just reread, The Miseducation of Cameron Post. She has an MFA in fiction from the University of Montana and a PhD in English from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. She lives with her wife and two terrible dogs in Rhode Island, and Plain Bad Heroines is her first adult novel. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And I would also like to introduce Sara Lautman. Sara Lautman is an illustrator, cartoonist, and teacher in Baltimore, Maryland. Her drawings have been published by The New Yorker, The New York Times, Playboy, Mad, The Paris Review, Tablet, The All, Catapult, Electric Literature, and other publications. Her forthcoming graphic novel will be published by Discut Press in 2021. And she's also my partner. She didn't say that. I did.
Thanks, Olivia.
We wanted to give a brief description of the book in case anyone hadn't read it. So for those of you who haven't had the pleasure yet, Plain Bad Heroines is a novel, and it follows the history of a turn-of-the-century all-girls school in Rhode Island through a string of ghastly accidents into the present day as three heroines and their director try to make a movie about the school's haunted history. And I can say I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're both really excited to have you join us here today. And I know that both of you are interested in sharing a little bit, both a reading by Em, and Sarah would also like to share some of her process. So Em, if you would like to start us off with a short taste of your book, that would be awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks again for having me. I am going to read just right from the opening, so I shouldn't have to do too much setup. And yeah, I think as you described, the novel really is, it's roughly divided into a past portion and a contemporary portion, and we start off in the past in 1902. One macabre afternoon to begin. It's a terrible story, and one way to tell it is this: two girls in love and a fog of wasps curse the place forever after. Maybe you think you already know this story because of the movie made of it. Not so, but you'll discover that soon enough. For now, let me acquaint you with Vespula maculifrons, the eastern yellow jacket. If you're imagining some do-gooder honeybee humming about the pastel pages of a children's book, don't. Eastern yellow jackets are aggressive when provoked, relentless when defending their underground home. They don't make honey, but might I offer you instead the desiccated insect paste they use to grow their masses? A given colony's workers are all stinging, sterile females who, in autumn, when they've been laid off from their busy work and can sense that the coming freeze will bring their deaths, just want to fly around, bored and gorging on carbs. But then don't we all? Because they also feed on carrion, some people refer to them as meat bees. That's technically incorrect, but it sounds good. Most crucially for our purposes here, you should know that when they're in distress, yellow jackets release a pheromone to call on potentially thousands of their angry friends to help them come get you. In this case, the you was Clara Broward, and my God, was she ever in love with Florence Flo Hartshorn. And my God, did that fact ever upset Clara's wretched cousin Charles, who was just now chasing Clara through the thick woods surrounding the Brocante School for Girls. The air in those woods was weighted with the scent of fern rot and ocean tide, apple mash, and wet earth. And more than that, it was humming with the trill of yellow jackets. A few were probably already swirling around Clara like dust motes sprung from the beating of a rug, their buzzing pitch threaded to her pulse as her messy steps propelled her toward a clearing and the black Oxford orchard, where apples felled in a recent storm now spoiled in the heat. And it was hot, the day humid and gray, one of those overripe summer days that sometimes linger into fall. And waiting there in the orchard with those spoiling black apples, lolled beneath a tree with juice dripping from her chin, was Flo, the love of Clara's young life, a life about to end. 2 lives about to end, careful readers. We know that the year was 1902 and the state the tiniest in the nation, Rhode Island. We know that the Brocante's fall term had been in session for 6 weeks. And we know that Clara took off into that section of the woods, onto the orchard path, because several of her classmates watched her do it. She'd just been delivered back to campus after a weekend stay at her parents' house across the water in Newport, a house they were then readying to close for the season. Cousin Charles had been the one tasked with driving Clara to campus. More than a few students had noted this because what he'd driven her in was still something of a loud and chugging novelty, even for the wealthy Brocante's population. A gas-powered automobile. And not just any automobile, but a Winton, same as the Vanderbilts, which is exactly why Charles had gone out and bought the damn thing, along with the even stupider driving goggles that went with it. And he was, of course, wearing them when they pulled through the Brocante's gate, and then as he slowed, he pushed them up, which smushed his hair back into a nest atop his horrible head. Maybe some of the girls had, in fact, later said that he looked rakish and fine, but for now, let's discount their certainly incorrect opinions. The important thing to know is that Charles and Clara were arguing as they arrived, and they continued to argue, the onlookers said, as he parked his loud contraption in the circle drive before Main Hall. They seemed to say their goodbyes very unhappily, Charles lunging from the car before gathering Clara's belongings, only to dump them on the ground, all the while continuing to lecture her. Then he climbed back into the driver's seat and pouted there, his arms folded tight across his chest, his dumb face bitter as a cranberry and nearly as red. But whatever the commands she'd just been given, Clara did not stoop to gather her things and go inside her dormitory as one might have expected of her, as, it seems, Charles was expecting of her. Instead, she left the pile of clothing and cases and walked a few yards to a cluster of her gate-mouthed fellow students. She then asked where she could find Flo. Several of those students, including a third year, Eleanor Faderman, told her to try the orchard. They told her that's where Flo had been headed earlier. With this news, Clara started her march across the wide lawn, which ended in a playing field rimmed with woods, where began the orchard path. During these moments, stupid Charles still stewed behind the steering wheel, his great engine chugging. But he did not then pull down his goggles and drive away from campus. Instead, he watched Clara, watched, disbelieving, each step she took away from him and toward the tree line. And then she disappeared completely into the dark mouth that was the path's entrance. This is where the onlooking classmates begin to differ in their accounts. Some later insisted that Clara knew her knuckle-dragging cousin had left the car to chase after her. Those students claimed that she'd started to run even before reaching the woods, seeing or sensing Charles coming fast behind. Others said she didn't know, hadn't seen. And Clara herself could never say again. I will stop there, but that definitely gives you a bit of a flavor of the narrator and things to come.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
And Sarah, if you would like to share some visuals and some of your process, that would be awesome. Oh, I think you might be muted still.
All right. I'm really glad Em read right from the beginning, because that's the first language that I read from the book when we first started working on it. And so right away, I had to draw a lot of plants, a lot of like botanicals and plants and leaves. And that was kind of good conditioning for me, like to be able to draw like the environment of this book, because if it wasn't botanicals, it was going to be some kind of busy interior, like whatever happened. Like I noticed later on, like in most of the illustrations that I made, the characters were like always kind of like they were surrounded by something. Like there was always some kind of canopy or walls. Like nobody's ever in a free zone. And like as the illustrator, I could never get away with like having a low key background, because that always played a really big part in what was going to happen to them. And usually it was going to be kind of scary. So now I can show you some of the early stuff that I drew when we first started working together. Let's see. Oh, right. Okay. So this is the first sketch I made of a scene that takes place in this set called the Orangery. A lot of action goes down in there. It's kind of a greenhouse that primarily grows citrus fruits. Am I getting that right? Mm-hmm. That's what the Orangery is. So this is the scene where this character, Eleanor, is, she didn't follow the two teachers here, but anyway, she's spying on these two members of the faculty who are major characters, having their little tryst, and they're having their little makeout in the Orangery. So I drew this quickly, and it felt great. I was really proud of myself for just like getting these postures right. Like this character leaning in on this character. Now I can't remember which one is which, but I was just like so patting myself on the back for being like, oh, look, like, you know, like Libby's the more aggressive one. And I'm like so great for putting that in there. So I draw this character, and I'm just going to show a few images about that are different drafts of this illustration and sort of how that process went. So that's pencil drawing that I sort of like jacked up the darks in Photoshop and then printed out. So I have a printout on a piece of paper. And the second image is same pencil drawing printed out, and I put some ink wash over it so I could get a feel for the lights and darks. And light is going to be really important here because they're in a greenhouse, so during the day, so there's lots of sunlight coming in. And I like had to think like, wait, like where's the light coming from? Is it this side of the leaf or that side of the leaf? Not for every single leaf, but you know, like you have to make it consistent. All right, so I get this far. I'm feeling good about this, but I decide that the posture of Eleanor, this character in the foreground, isn't really doing what I want it to do. So I get my friend Zoe to just kind of do this pose for me. And I did this a lot. Like I work in like, I'm fortunate to work in an environment that like usually has some people around, so I can get them to do poses for me. And I can do it myself. Like I can put a timer on my camera and walk away and do a pose, and that's fine. But it's a lot more fun when I can direct someone else. So she did this for me. And I drew her in pencil. And then I went back into the drawing, and there were like more, there were a couple more rounds of inking and cleaning up and doing more work, but I put Zoe in there, and this is the final illustration. And you can see that there are these slightly like busier little shapes over here where I'm putting my cursor. And that has become sort of this weird Easter egg because it's left over from a moment where I had an idea that I might make a hidden picture game out of the whole book and hide tons and tons of yellow jackets in all these busy botanical drawings. So I started trying to do that, and then eventually like decided not to do it because it was really hard. But I still really like that idea. Like you get done with the book, and then it's like now you have to go back and find 77 yellow jackets.
You can see them really clearly, I feel like, in this one. Like, I think you really nailed it here, because I can see like potentially 3, but I can see 2 really, I feel like, really clearly. So I'm zooming right in on them.
Thanks.
I mean, obviously you just said that, but I feel like it was a success.
You have to relax your eyes and look past the drawing.
I mean, I remember us having a lot of conversations about hiding yellow jackets and both being really into it, and then thinking logistically about how that was going to work and where they were going to be. And there were lots of other things to do. So the other thing I remember about this series, just as the person you were collaborating with, is because I don't think I saw, like, obviously all of those, right? Like you did so many drafts of things, and I would see some of them. I would see like a couple, because I do remember being like, more leaves. We're like, really? And I'm like, yes, no, there have to be more leaves. It has to be kind of whatever. And then I think something about this planter, because the size of the planter is mentioned a lot in the book. And so it had to be something that, like, was big enough really that she could conceivably have been behind it. Those are the only 2 specific things that I really remember about us. After we had shared, like early on, I think I shared some like conservatory and greenhouse pictures and like, things like that I had been thinking about when I was writing the book. But yeah, then you took it and ran with it. And it was always fun for me to get like an email with you with like, here's where I am, or here's what I've done now.
Yeah, we were able to make a lot of, since I was kind of pumping out sketches, like we were able to like make different choices and like react to them like fairly quickly. So it was like a really like a pretty, just like a dynamic process. But I don't know. Anyway, now there are these 3 random yellow jackets in this drawing and no other drawings, as far as I can remember. Maybe there's still some in there that I forgot about. So here's another sketch. This is another scene that happened in the orangerie when they find, the wretched Eleanor's body. We're just dropping spoilers here, right? Like, how can we not? So I don't know. I really like this sketch. We didn't end up going to a final on it, but I just like these lines that I made like 3 years ago. And when I was looking through my files today, I wanted to put it in. Here's a slightly similar sketch. I think it's the kind of thing like this moment that I drew took place like within 5 fiction minutes of this moment with the finger pointing. And it was sort of an interesting and kind of new process for me to choose the moments that I was going to illustrate. Because it's, this is why literary illustration is more fun for me than like editorial illustration, because in editorial illustration, you have to be more conceptual. And I'm very literal. So if I can just like have these people who are kind of like puppets and like put on a play on a stage, that kind of drawing is really satisfying.
And see, I think in the final, because I think you're right, I do remember that discussion. Like, we're not gonna give Eleanor Faderman 2 illustrations in her chapter, right? But then this chapter ends up getting pushed much further along in the book. So I think we probably could have had it. I remember us too talking about her hiding and looking at the teachers, just because, again, that theme we were playing with throughout several of the illustrations, and it's obviously really examined in the book of people witnessing things they're not supposed to see, or kind of lurking from a place and being observant to something. So to actually have an illustration where we're looking at a character doing that thing that happens again and again throughout the book seemed like something we wanted to do. So, but I remember that. I remember when we were like, well, we have these two and they're going to be right next to each other. And it turns out it would have been like 40 pages down the way. But, that's the thing about like a book changing as we're working on it,
Totally. And that was cool because, we got a little further down the line and we were figuring out like what our themes were. Yeah. And so this thing of like surveillance and being surveilled, like it made it that much easier to like when it was choosing time, like which ones are the ones we're like, right. Oh, duh, like the one of her spying, not the one of her dying. But I like finished the heck out of this.
This got really far, yeah.
Just liked it. And here's a sketch of another one that I did pretty early on of a scene where I think it's the character Libby. This is like one of the teachers are making out, but this is like their before story when they meet at like the Wellesley School for Girls, and she's kind of putting on this like skit on that's supposed to be kind of like a cute like, do you want to go out with me, like gesture to Alex, this character in the audience. And it's another looking drawing. This happened pretty fast. Here's the first sketch, pencil, and then I scan it and pump up the darks and print it out so I can lightbox over it and play around with it. And I lightboxed over some ink wash, just like the other one. And oh dang, I thought I put the finish in. Well, the finish is really nice.
It is really nice. And I remember being really glad to have that one. I do remember you doing that too, and being really glad to have it, because that was a chapter, that meet cute, the two teachers meet cute, was a chapter I really had to fight for in the book. And I was glad that we had an illustration that went along with it, so I could sort of make my case about like, no, this has to stay, and look, it's already illustrated and we're going to keep their story. So, because I feel like this came really early. And again, I could be misremembering, but this is one that I remember you doing pretty early, and then us just holding on to and being like, we're keeping this.
Yeah, no, this is, I feel like the core group of like early illustrations are like, I have like this relationship with them where I'm like, you guys have been there from the beginning. And like, how it, like you're my friends.
It's interesting that, sorry to interject, that the illustrations coming together served as kind of a way for you to shape the novel and also to defend parts of it. Is it all right while you show some of the rest of the images that we ask some questions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Yeah,
sure. So our first question is, how did you two meet, and what led to you collaborating?
I wrote a fan email to M after I read the Miseducation of Cameron Post. And I had been trying to sort of like catch myself up like in queer YA lit. So I was just straight up like going to different websites that I liked and like reading books that were listed. And I just really connected with Cam Post, and I wrote M and I said, this is really great. And there were these little incidental illustrations in there, and I really appreciated that. So I could just tell that I liked her taste. I mean, it's the reason that anyone would write a fan letter to someone whose book they just read and it really left an impression on them.
And I remember, I do remember you mentioning Cam, and I just don't think of it as a fan letter. It's like nice to hear you tell that version, because I just remember you being like, hey, whatever. But what I really remember is you said specifically, like, if you ever want to collab on something, and I looked up your work and whatever, and had seen some of your stuff, and not obviously known you. I wasn't like following you or anything, and so I immediately was like, oh, I do, but I don't have anything. Because in my mind, we could just go find the email, right? It wouldn't be that hard. But in like my mind, I feel like maybe I asked you like, well, what would we work on? And I think you mentioned like, well, I did, I illustrated an essay for someone, or I've illustrated a short story or something. But they were all shorter things.
You wrait a 600-page novel.
That's right. No, you mentioned short things, and I was like, oh, I'm not your writer. It's never gonna happen, So I think I sort of like put you off. But then I got a bit into, we obviously exchanged friendly emails and whatever, and started following each other on Instagram or whatever. But then I got further into the book and started to figure out more what this book was going to be, and that it was going to have this really significant historical section, which I didn't always know for this novel. And I was like, this is the thing that should be illustrated. Like, there's no question, this is the thing. And I was so delighted that you were down with it, because I really thought that I might email you and you'd be like, yeah, no, that's not what I was proposing,
No.
Just thinking like an essay. So
no,
yeah.
It was like it was so great. It was like a perfect proposal for a collaboration. Like this style of like line-based, like 20th century, 19th century book illustration, like, is my jam. And there's like, it's hard to find inputs for it. Like, I can draw, in this style, like all as much as I want. Like, I can start whatever project I want, but to like be involved with a project of this like level of commitment and actually be able to like put these like my like put both of our hyper nerdy interests like to work together. I was like, oh my God, like it's like basically like the dream.
Yeah. I loved that we got to nerd out as much as we did. Like, I tell my map story all the time, that we wanted the map and we got the map and we had to work to get the map, and like till the last moment we weren't sure if we were going to get the map or where it was going to be in the book. And I do remember you telling me that you weren't a cartographer, which is totally fair. I'm like, this is not the map in my head, but it is now the map in my head. So you figured it out. I don't know how exactly you became the cartographer of this particular map in this style for this book. So yeah.
I looked at a lot of other maps.
I'll do
I
it.
just drew maps forever until we found one that we liked.
That we liked, yeah.
Oh yeah. So anyway, I'm sort of slowly scrolling through another series of process images with one of these with Alex. The character Alex is running down the stairs in the middle of the night, and yeah, man, I drew this scene a lot of times, and this is how it came out.
Sara, can I ask how that usually work? So would share chapters or sections or ideas and language with you as she went, or was everything kind of done at the end? It sounds like there was a lot of collaboration. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, it was very like dynamic, as I said. Em would send, I think, like, she started out sending like a draft of the book, like as it existed, which was like maybe half written, like still very much a draft. And I would like draw on that for a while and send her some images. And, either by then or after a little while, she'd have some additional chapters, or maybe part of the book would have been like totally revised. And I mean, it's a really section-y book. Like it's happening on two timelines. There's very much like the way it's structured was easy to like chop up, but it was being created and like reimagined and like even like sort of like reframed in the sense of what its expected audience would be. So there's a lot of change going on as we were emailing back and forth. And that was great for me because, I mean, a lot of times, like when an illustrator works with a writer, it will be somebody who maybe the publisher gets after the manuscript is finished. But this wasn't like that. It was us just kind of building this thing in a conversation, and it was really cool.
It was so cool for me too, because I think like I mean, I've never collaborated with an illustrator. I've not collaborated really with anyone, certainly not on a novel, in terms of like a project this big. And so since it was dynamic in the way that Sarah's describing, there were things in the way that Sara might see the characters, or even just in the way that we would have a discussion about, right? Like, well, why tease this moment out? Or like, what are we going to illustrate that would be useful for me as I'm still shaping the book? Like, and that was so much fun and not something I think I ever expected. And Sarah's right. Like, I mean, I think we had our list of like, these are the illustrations and felt really good about it and whatever. And then as we got closer to kind of like final pass, and we knew, because something we're sort of leaving out is we were working together and I was committed to it. And I'm like, this is how I'm going to try to sort of sell the book, but we didn't know for sure the book would be published with illustrations. This is how we were presenting it. It was important to have it like as a total package and go in and say, this is an illustrated novel and it works in this way. And again, luckily everybody at Morrow was on board with that and understood that. And we're like, yes, let's do it. But then fairly far down the line, we added some illustrations. Remember, like it was, we kind of were done. And then it was like, well, it's not evenly spaced and we should really see this and we never see this. And so I remember for a while kind of thinking like, this is our set. And then, a few more being added and yeah, throughout. And it was just it really was, yeah, Sarah said it well, we were able to nerd out in a way that was just delightful. We both knew these characters and we knew this world. And I felt like we kind of had a shorthand and yeah, it was such a long process. It was a years-long process. Sarah works much more quickly than I do, but like from that first email to the kind of like, let's do this, to the book coming out, it was a long time of figuring this out together. So it was great. I miss it, frankly. It was always like, there would be periods of like not talking for months, but then it would be like a lot of kind of, there are things going on and lots of things to see. So I really loved it. And it's really opened me up to collaboration in other forms, which has been so much fun. I don't think I would have been otherwise. So it was great in that way too.
That's awesome to hear.
I love it when you say that. It makes me feel so proud.
Yeah.
Sure. What was I going to say? Yeah, it's really so cool to like, now that this is over, like the book's out, other people read it and stuff. It is so wild to just like have people talk about the characters in this book I'm sure like everyone who is involved in bookmaking feels this way, but just like Audrey and Merritt and Harper, like these people who just like lived inside my computer and my mind and on the phone with M for such a long time to like other people know them now too. This illustration was one of the ones we did later. This is a scary scene with Libby taking a bath. Am I right? Is that Libby? And another character is sort of in a moment of possession and approaches her in like this very vulnerable moment. And I was looking all over the place for this video I took of my studio mate posing to be like the scary, like possessed intruder. And I couldn't find it, so I'm mad. But it was just like that was like a moment when I was like, oh my God, like I had this process cracked really great, because I just had her like come in like through the door a bunch of times and like be scary, but like also out of it, and she was really good. So I just drew her, and I was pretty satisfied with how it came out. Also,
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say that this illustration is the one that they were like wouldn't run in newspapers when they needed to like pull an illustration because there's like just a hint of a nipple in it.
Just every time we got an opportunity, I would be like, send that one first until the team was finally like, there's no point in sending it.
Cowards.
Do you have one of the plants you mentioned, the botanicals?
Oh, let's see. Oh, that's the
finish.
finish.
And that's the final one. That's beautiful. I have a question about the heart influences in the novel, which I feel like really come through in this picture. So Sarah's illustrations and also the super lush and spooky language in the novel highlights the grotesque and the horror elements of the book. And there's a long history, especially in Victorian literature, of horrific characters having a queer resonance, either a queer subtext or an explicit queer narrative. Was that history important to you, and how did that feed into writing this book?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that my fandom as a fan of both gothic lit and horror lit, it's sort of like, it twines with my queerness, my queer identity. And when I think about like gothic novels that maybe have queer, largely it would be like subtextual, queer elements. So I'm thinking Picnic at Hanging Rock as like one great example, but Rebecca too, because I love a Mrs. Danforth ice cream. Not everybody can ice queen. Not everybody can get on, not ice cream. I must be hungry. Not everybody can get on board with that. But I can. So, I think, like I've always, as like a fan of horror, paired those things, but knew that that this book was, for all kinds of reasons, going to be really explicit about queer desire and queer identity, and not obviously relegate those things to the subtext, or necessarily twine queerness with the monstrous, right? So yeah, I mean, I think that, yes, I'm, as a lifelong horror fan, both in terms of film, and we haven't talked much about that because we've been talking a lot about the historical period, but there is a whole, there's the whole sort of contemporary section of the book is really about the making of a horror film. And so that kind of fandom influences all sorts of aspects of the book as well. So yeah, and I don't know, Sarah, if we talked a lot about like your relationship with horror or not, or if you're a horror fan. I mean, I'm sure we must have had those conversations, but I don't remember.
I think we did a little, but I've watched more horror maybe on purpose in the last 5 years than I have in my whole life, because I think I'm like more coming around to it. Like, I think there was like maybe kind of a genre block for me before, for whatever reason. I think a lot because I'm very scared of horror, and so to be like seek it out like didn't feel like a natural thing. Sure. Like but at this point I feel like more interested in it because I think I've just seen enough, like, I mean, different like movies and comics and books and visual art, that it just feels more dimensional to me and more interesting, maybe a way that I didn't really get before. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like we talked about film more than anything else. Like we talked about like so many different like kinds of media, like when we were bopping around with in our phone conversations. I mean, I feel like we're talking about a lot of like 90s like queer, like big budget movies. Like we're talking about like, I don't know, like Now and Then and stuff. Not like to really like not
as influences, but just to talk about 90s. Yeah, movies that could have been queer that weren't. Always the case. Well, I had, just for like people that maybe haven't read the novel that might be listening, I will say that like I think of it like, certainly as a gothic novel, which we could say is a subheading of horror, side cat, however you want to put that, but. I do like I'm not going to promise this, but I have a couple of friends who have told me that they're scaredy cats and they don't like horror, but this was okay, right? Like there are some really scary scenes, but I think like largely I hope because of the narrative voice and because there's humor laced throughout, I think that like the horror is often being undercut. I'm not going to say always, or that there aren't some horrifying moments, or some moments when a friend who read the book recently said to me that he was glad that his wife and dog were around, which I was like, fair enough, right? So I'm not going to say there aren't any like tough moments, but I should say like it's certainly a blend of horror and humor. Like it's both of those things, or intended to be. Like you should never say that your book is funny because someone will quickly tell you it's not. So
well, one thing that I appreciate, I think that comes through in the illustration and also in your narrative voice, is there's Sarah, when you were talking about not being like a huge fan of horror, I think that there are a lot of comic illustrators throughout history that use a horror motif and obviously are huge fans of horror, but don't. The point is not necessarily to scare people like Edward Gorey or Charles Addams, who did the Addams Family, or even, oh my God, revoke my librarian card, but Roald Dahl's illustrator.
Oh, Quentin. Blake.
Yeah,
Blake.
I was like,
Yeah.
not William Blake. That's somebody else. But, Quentin Blake. I think a lot of that sort of energy of being in on the joke or the scare, but also having a little bit of spooky energy is alive and well in this work and the writing as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that perspective or that style of illustration is like really my favorite thing, which is like sort of counterintuitive to me not being so into horror stuff. But like I think about even looking at like Stephen Gammell's illustrations from the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark series.
Yeah.
Those are so, I mean, like they're so scary.
Oh, they
like,
are. Yeah. Yeah.
They're like put the book in the freezer and be so scared forever. Scary.
Absolutely.
But
Sometimes
then
scarier than the story, right? Those illustrations, absolutely. I mean, you can see, I've just been like doing the New Year thing of like reorganizing bookshelves, and I came across one of my copies, like my childhood copies of that. And I was still like, oh, that cover, the skeleton sort of eye. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Or that just my stupid copy would always fall open to that illustration of like the lady who comes upstairs in the inn.
Yeah.
And she's not even doing anything scary. She's just like the scariest looking person ever. Yeah,
and
the story.
That's Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, right?
Yeah, yep.
Yes. Alvin Schwartz and Stephen Gammell. But also a lot of those drawings were very funny. And like Stephen Gammell's, the book that I always remember from his like author and illustrator like catalog is called like The Fearless Flying Hot Dogs. Like, I mean, that's something different, but it's like about like these funny flying hot dogs, and it's like a humor book for kids. So like, yeah, I mean, I like file me with the funny horror people who don't watch horror movies like when I die.
Well, I think that I love when people bring up gory, and specifically like Charles Adams makes sense too. But I love when people bring up gory because again, like there's nothing that this novel isn't winking at like endlessly, and there is even, in the novel, not just in like stuff that Sara and I talked about, but in the novel, Harper's tattoo is described as being gory inspired essentially, and so the yellow jacket is drawn in like a gory sort of style, and that's how you drew that yellow jacket tattoo that's got the Brookhaunts motto on it. So yeah, we were, in all kinds of ways, kind of nodding and paying homage to Edward Gorey.
Yeah. This is the last image in my set. It's a drawing of a scene that isn't in the book anymore, right? Did they go to the chandelier tree?
They do.
They do. Oh yeah, they absolutely go. Yeah, but I'm honestly not sure I ever saw this illustration. I don't think I did. I like it.
I should have sent it to you.
Yeah. They do go. It may have been at a time that we were really careful, right, about like when you got to see the contemporary characters. And so they go in the first half of the novel, right before. So I think that might have been part of the thinking is like, we're not gonna show them yet. We don't get to see them.
Yeah, we had all this stuff about like the magic, like the illustrations only come when like a supernatural force is afoot. So like we're not allowed to see like, Audrey in the car with her mom because like there's no ghosts in the car.
Yeah. No. That Brookhaunts was the conductor of. Yeah. At least
that's such an interesting way to handle the illustrations and kind of keep in line with the whole gory-esque influence of the whole thing to tie them to the historic time period. I'm gonna admit I didn't notice that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go
on, Aya. Sorry,
I was going to ask if we wanted to move to some of the audience questions.
Yeah, let's. Do you want to ask another question or two, Aya, and we can move to the audience questions in about 5?
Yeah, sure.
Awesome.
So one of the questions that we had actually relates to film. So since we were just talking about it, I thought we would start with that one. Film also showed up, Emily, in your novel, The Miseducation of Cameron Post, as this kind of access point for queer life and queer identity. And then here it's central to the plot. So maybe to circle back to that discussion of 90s movies, did queer films shape both your understandings of queer identity or queer text? And do you have any recommendations for us?
Absolutely. I think like when people sort of question, how much of Cam Post is like autobiographically informed, or like we know you grew up in Mile City, so what might you share? Like the list of videos that she rented to kind of find her queer self, or just the videos that I rented, and the moments that I didn't have quite as creepy a VHS clerk, but definitely felt like renting, if I could even find them in my little, rural hick town in Eastern Montana, would be a kind of outing, right? Like if I present, like how many times can you rent A League of Their Own before, like, and I know we're talking limited, but it's, oh, you're getting that. The Desert Hearts was not on the shelves, I can promise you. And so, but Basic Instinct was, right? And so it's sort of like, what was there to choose from? And I know I'm dating myself. And then do you make the public declaration of taking it up to the clerk? And, I would know like the schedules of the clerks and who was working when, and when I felt okay renting something and even returning them sometimes. So that all is born from life. And then HBO, like cable TV, when my parents were like paying for it and we had it in the house, was also the place where if you could we had one TV, but if you could sneak it at a certain time, you might see queer content. And so it's hard, like, because I don't know if you do, I mean, I think, Sarah, if you do this, but I do a thing where like I think that I saw like a great sort of queer movie, like I think that I saw that early, but then I'm like, did you just know later on, like when you were in college, that was an important queer movie, and you're telling yourself because it makes the story better that you saw it in like 96 or something, and you didn't actually. And so, it was more movies like Fried Green Tomatoes, right? Where the Fanny Flagg's book is much more explicit about the queer relationships. But, I also don't know how anybody can watch that cooking scene with the pie and not read that as a sex scene. It clearly is. And, they're clearly a couple. Yeah. So I'm not, that's not like going to be my list, but I'll just say like that it was those kinds of films. And I absolutely was looking for, like how to be, I think, I wanted to know like how to be in the world in the way that I felt. And I thought maybe these movies could teach me if I could get my hands on the movies and watch them in private. So.
Yeah. When I was reading it, it struck me that if the movie were made, it would be the kind of movie that like a young queer person would like sneak onto IFC to watch in the book. And that it's kind of a self-perpetuating like cycle of communicating queer identity. And I thought that was very beautiful. Yeah.
I'm like, I like that challenge that Em just posed. Like, what did you? I didn't watch like. I mean, it took me like a few years to get to Desert Hearts. Like that wasn't even my. This is the only. That wasn't even my like trying to find some kind of gay media thing. I like watched that like in my late 20s, and I was like, this is the best movie ever. But I know that I like registered like not quite role models, but just like whatever had like a lesbian vibe to it. Like I didn't know what it was, but there was something really cool about it. Like the maid Alice in the Brady Bunch. Like whatever. I don't even like. I watched a lot of that show because it was on a lot, but I didn't like it that much. It's just the show. But Alice,
right? She
was really funny. She was strong and cool and kind of mysterious.
Very mysterious.
Confirmed bachelorette.
Yeah. Confirmed bachelorette. Just I was like, oh, that's the good kind of. That's the cool kind of person. And then later I was like, oh yeah, because they're dyke.
Yeah. That's interesting. Like those shows that are on, and I'm trying to think of like there are certainly other TV shows that I can think of that had that moment. Yeah. Like I do remember. I mean, this will very much date me, but like I do specifically remember that Ellen came out on her sitcom my senior year of high school. I'm quite sure it was my senior year, and I. Like I'd heard all this sort of whatever. And I do remember like announcing I was not out at the time and didn't feel comfortable coming out, and like announcing to my parents at dinner that I thought like it was important that we all watch it as a family, and them being like, we don't care to watch. Like they weren't upset, but they're like, we don't really care to watch it. But if you want to go in the other room and watch it, you're welcome to. And I was like, oh, I really felt like I was doing something here, and I'll just go in the other room and watch it,
And then you're like, I don't know, that that whole thing is like so interesting to me, because also then when you're watching like this historic TV thing happen, and meanwhile, I must have just learned this because I'm still sort of surprised by it. I'm not sure if it was Time. I think it might have been Time, but some big national magazine offered Lily Tomlin an I'm Gay cover, like 10 years prior, something like in the 80s. And she was like, no, like, go away.
Yeah. I don't want the If I'm Gay cover. Yeah.
Yeah.
Olivia, you're muted.
I was just saying, as we wrap up and get to the audience questions portion, just thinking about like lesbian visibility in history, and this novel being two stories, one that takes place in the early 1900s and one that is very contemporary and involves film and different kinds of hiding and visibility. It's just, there's so many references to seeing that kind of work, whether it's explicit or sort of more coded into the novel, and I just really appreciate that.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I feel like I didn't tire of this, like, referencing things that I knew that, like, maybe, some of the audience would recognize and some wouldn't. But it's been really wonderful for me to get messages from people that are like, this is just like so gay, right? Like, I mean, I think I knew it was going to be, but like, it's so, and I couldn't be more delighted about that. So, like, in every way that it can be.
That's awesome. Well, I know we appreciate it, and it sounds like some people in the audience do too. So I'm going to jump to sharing some of their questions and comments. So,
sorry, I'm shifting around so much. This chair is uncomfortable. It's probably like annoying to watch.
No, it's exciting. Yeah. Graber Moss says we're reading it out loud in our household every night, and we are loving it. Getting close to the end. That sounds fun, especially with the dear reader narrative voice.
Oh, that's
lovely to be read out loud. A couple
cozy.
People, huh?
It's cozy.
Yeah.
I think that's so cool. My wife and I read a book once, tried to quietly read a book once to each other on a Greyhound bus, and were like fairly, like, so roundly, like, shushed by everyone. They were like, shut the hell up. I was like, this is only cute to the two of us.
Yeah.
In your house is much better at night before bed.
We had a couple questions. Everyone got really excited. I'm not surprised, since we have some mystery lovers in the audience, but everyone got very excited to learn about what influenced the cutting of, or the possible cutting, the Meet Cute chapter. Was that up to you, the publisher? And also, how difficult was it to choose which scenes to illustrate?
So the Meet Cute chapter was early on in the book. I think like the draft that my editor bought, and the book changed. We worked on it for like a year and a half, and the book changed a lot. I mean, there was a whole, I know people who haven't read the book, but there was like a wedding. You saw Libby and Harold's wedding. There was a number of things in the book that are not in the book now because I overwrite. So it was really, there was some of the early chapters didn't change almost at all, but as we got into the book, things changed, and that Meet Cute chapter was there from the start. And I think where it was positioned, it felt like maybe in terms of characterization, it was hitting some beats, that some things we already knew about the character, and that it was, I think, again, I'm just trying to, I always wanted it there, but I think that my editor felt, at least initially, that it was a little bit superfluous, right? Like, so, like, we really need to know what Alex and Libby are doing now at the school, right? Whatever, but maybe we don't need this moment. And I was like, we do need this moment, and my argument was that, like, these, a number of horrifying, terrible things are going to happen to them, and I would really like to see them in this happier time. And also as like a lesbian in a relationship with a woman that, we've been in this relationship for 20 years. I love that I got to show like an older, sort of essentially for the time married queer women couple, but I also, because of that, because we saw that, I also wanted to see, and I wanted the audience to see sort of them when they were younger and how their relationship has changed and the way that they conceive of their relationship. So it was really important to me, and I made that argument. And again, it was never like a hard, like, this must go, but it was just when we were looking the book is very long, as anyone who's read it will know. It easily would have been 900 pages if we hadn't cut things, right? Like easily, just knowing myself. And so when you're looking at things, and and then another thing that sort of had to happen is that I had to use that narrative voice, which I leaned into as I was revising the book, to think about like, well, how do I situate this chapter in a way that the narrator kind of tells you why it's important? And so if you look at the beginning of that chapter, before we get that, like, let's go back and visit them, you essentially get the narrator saying what I just said, like, this is important to me, why you see this, right? Like the narrator is saying, you're trusting me to tell this story, and I'm telling you this is important. So, so that was a great thing about having a narrator who likes to have opinions about everything, that I could use that when I needed to. And that took a while to figure out, like, when to turn that voice off and when to mute it, because I had to show something else. So
Totally.
So yeah,
Well, Oh, sorry. That leads pretty naturally to our next audience question. The narrator is such a strong voice, yet we never explicitly meet her. What drove that decision? What was writing it like?
So I know who the narrator is, right? Like, I feel like I know who the narrator is. Although I said to someone, I feel like I know who it is, but I'm willing to be convinced otherwise. And they were like, well, how could that be? And I'm like, well, I could be wrong, right? There's a reason we don't meet the narrator. But in my head, the narrator is a character in the novel. And I do think there are a couple of clues in the book as to who the narrator is. And they're not like explicit, shining, they're not hidden like in the illustrations or anything. But I think there are a couple of times when the narrator kind of shows her hand. And again, I'm sure some people would say, like, if I pointed them out, they would be like, that's not enough for anybody to tell. So I've heard like great guesses, like, is it Mary McLean? Is it you? But I think like, because
that would be so disappointing if you were like, it's me.
Somebody completely random, right? That they're like, yeah. And so it's me. All the characters are me, but it's not me more than that. So, I think it did take a long time to figure out how to tell this story, like what that voice was, and that was part of we didn't talk a lot about this at the beginning, and it was fun because we dove right in, but it was a years-long process of kind of figuring out how to write this novel, and it was great that Sara was along for so much of that. And part of that was just leaning into the voice and really like deciding that this is the voice, because while some of the content was similar and some of the storyline was similar, I do have versions of this, not that far in, but chapters where the voice is not winking nearly as much. And I think is sort of, less comedy, more horror, basically, or trying to anyway. And so it was, again, just kind of settling into like, nah, this is the right way to tell this story. So
do I know who the narrator is?
I don't know. Do you?
No. I don't think I do.
I haven't said, and I don't plan to. But I mean, the narrator in my mind is a character in the novel who in the novel. So yeah. And there are a couple times, like there's more than one. There's two that I can think of where the narrator kind of shows her hand.
Breaking news. We're all going to go back and read this.
I know it's going to be one of those things where people are like, that you thought that was enough for anybody to guess what you're talking about. But
so we just have a minute more, so I'm going to introduce one more question. Something we barely even touched on in the interview is the novel. One of the characters in the novel is a real life writer, Mary McLean, and her book I Wait the Devil's Coming. So we could talk another 5 hours probably about that. But Mark asks, has your book renewed interest in I Wait the Devil's Coming? Our library is adding it to collections. Have you heard anything from people regarding?
I know it's renewed interest. Yes. I don't know if libraries are adding it to collections. I hope so. I mean, I've been tagged a couple of times on social media where like a library will have my book and it, but I don't know if they already had I Wait the Devil's Coming, and they'll sort of show them in the same post. But I absolutely know, because I've received a number of like DMs and like messages and stuff where people are like, I'd never heard of Mary McLean, right? People are always wanting to confess to me that they'd never heard of her. And I'm like, no, that's like, I'm sad that you hadn't, but you're able to confess that, like, how could I be missing this? And I'm delighted, because now you get to go and discover her work and read about her. So it's, and then the other sort of surprising thing that's happened is a few people, I mean, they've all figured it out. Nobody's still operating under this delusion, but a few people, I think, for a ways into the book, just assumed that I made her up, which I don't imagine Mary McLean would like very much. So, I'm glad that, that people are really, discovering her work. And I've heard personally from readers who told me I finished this book and I am now reading I Await the Devil's Coming. So, or they found the story of Mary MacLane, but either way, they found a copy. So, and I don't know that this has anything to do with my book. I don't know this. I'm not saying it. I kind of probably doubt it, but because her memoir was such a mega bestseller, you can still find first edition copies. Like they're not so rare, right? That you're talking like hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And I have them set up as like a search alert on eBay, and they periodically used to show up like every few weeks, and I haven't seen any for a while. So I don't know if maybe like there's some sense that like people should hang on to these now or something. I hope not, because it's really great to own one for like $9, right? So I hope they come back to the market. But yeah.
It'd be cool if you started getting haunted because like Mary MacLane was mad at you. Except that she'd probably be happy.
I feel like it would yeah. It would be a trip.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, you guys. This has been awesome. I know I'm excited to jump back in and read it again. And we had a lot of audience questions and excitement on all of our platforms. So thank you guys all so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us so much.
Yeah. So anyone who has attended and is a PGC MLS user, you can go to pgcmls.overdrive.com to check out this book. And looks like we don't have I Await the Devil's Coming, so hopefully that will change soon in the future. And if you would like to check out other events that we have for all family members, I just added the events link in the chat, pgcmls.info/events. So we would be thrilled to see you for book talks, craft activities, read alouds for kids, discussions with librarians, and a lot of other exciting stuff coming up. So thank you again, Emily, Sarah, and Aya for joining this discussion. It's been really a joy.
Yeah, of course.
Couldn't have asked for a better way to spend my Monday. So thank you. Thank you all.
Glad to hear it. Good night, everybody.
Good night.